Make sure we are joining the pair deck. And I will be checking if I find someone sandbagging us on the pair deck. It's very likely that you will see yourself being assigned an Ed Puzzle assignment of the recording of these notes with questions you have to answer. It would be much easier just to do this with the class while we're all here together. That code is going to stay in the upper right-hand corner. I'm still missing a couple of you. And we are starting off with a pair deck question, right, straight out of the gate. Consider your options and choose the one you think correctly answers the question. Who has made terrorist attacks in the Holy Land? Oh, is it not letting you? It's not letting you guys. It's been doing that lately. Now you guys should actually be able to see your options. Your options are Muslims, Jews, or Muslims and Jews. Who has made terrorist attacks in the Holy Land? We're going to take about 15 seconds of our timer. Most responses in. All right, and you guys, by an overwhelming majority, selected the correct answer. It is Muslims and Jews have committed terrorist attacks in the Holy Land. Now, before anybody thinks that I'm making political statements about the current events in the region, not. This is from a longer historical perspective. Both Muslims and Jews have committed terrorist attacks in the Holy Land going back decades and decades. And remember, when we left off, and it's been a while since we left off, because we spent a lot of time learning about the Holocaust, we were learning about something called Zionism. Zionism is a Jewish nationalist movement that claims what is the state of Israel today as the homeland for Jews and the place that should be their own country where they should have their own sovereign government. But what is now Israel and a Jewish state was something called British Mandate Palestine, which means it was under British control from right after World War I to right after World War II. The mandate part of it may sound a little weird. It was called British Mandate Palestine because there was an organization after World War I called the League of Nations, and the League of Nations gave Britain a mandate to govern Palestine. Okay, so it told them they had to, but it also gave them the power to govern Palestine. You will learn more about the League of Nations next year in U.S. history. I don't know if that gives you something to look forward to or something to dread, but you will learn more about it there. Now, in Palestine, before British Mandate and before modern Zionism, there were still Jews in Palestine. I remember part of the story of the Zionists is that the Jews had been driven out of their homeland. Well, 20,000 were there. But because of Zionism. By 1933, that number has increased by 650%. Actually, scratch that, 750%. And 1933 is the important date here. 1933 is the year Hitler comes to power. So we're not talking about a time period where lots of Jews are fleeing Europe and seeking safety in Israel. This is before that. Okay, so Zionism is driving a lot of Jews to want to settle in Israel. The problem this creates is that there are two groups now in Israel. There are the Arabs, and Arabs are the dominant group across much of North Africa and Southwest Asia, the Middle East. And the Arabs and Jews in Palestine both want to control it. And while the British are in control between 1920 and 1948, both groups will have their own rebellions against the British. The Arabs will try from 1936 to 1939, and they want two things. Ideally, they want an independent, sovereign Palestine under Arab control. But they at least want, if they can't get that, they at least want the British to stop letting Jews come to Palestine. And at this point in time, there will be lots of Jews who want to go to Palestine. 1936, persecution against the Jews is ramping up, and ever more so between 1936 and 1939. And the Brits do try to limit Jewish immigration. They even form a blockade to keep refugee ships from bringing Jews into Palestine. Jump forward between 1944 and 1948. The Jews will have their turn at rebellion, and they want the opposite of what the Arabs want. They want Jewish immigration to happen, and they want Israel to be a Jewish state, a sovereign Jewish state, a Jewish country to provide a safe place for the world's Jews. And by 1944, and especially by 1948, much of the world recognizes that the Jews have not been safe in Europe, and there needs to be some form of solution. During this period from 1944 to 1948, there is a Zionist insurgency. Insurgency has been a word that's been used a lot during your lifetime. You guys are probably, actually, a lot of it was done before you guys were born. But when there has been talk about insurgency during your life, it probably referred to insurgencies in Iraq and Afghanistan against the U.S. and its allies. Same kind of thing here. An insurgency is a rebellion. In this case, the rebellion is specifically against the British. And it also involved terrorism. So during this roughly 4-year period, the Zionists are fighting to keep Palestine open to Jews fleeing from Europe. You had these packed refugee ships, like the one shown here, and not just one, right? Convoys of refugee ships trying to get in. And one of the things the insurgents did was to try to help those ships sneak through or rush through the British blockade. The British are using their naval forces to try to keep the Jews out of Palestine. But as I said, they also engaged in terrorism. They bombed British targets, not always military targets. They bombed the King David Hotel. That's terrorism. They carried out assassinations of British leaders in Palestine. And they engaged in kidnapping of British soldiers and police, and often treated them very badly while they held them. Now, I'm telling you this again, not so that you guys can try to pick, quote, good guys and bad guys in the Israeli, Arab, Israel, Palestine conflict, but to understand that both sides have used the same kinds of strategies. Kidnapping in Israel today has focused on what Palestinians, Hamas from Gaza, Hamas forces from Gaza did, kidnapping Israeli citizens, right, and treating them badly. Now, in the middle of this, we have a new organization called the United Nations. You're also going to learn more about that next year in U.S. history. Okay, it is the replacement for the League of Nations. Right, a bit of a spoiler alert, the League of Nations was not a success. Jury's still out on the United Nations. Okay, but at least it still exists. And in the early days of the UN, the nations that were members of it had a plan. They were going to solve the Arab-Israeli problem by creating two separate states, two separate countries. And it was going to look like this. The orange parts shaded in were going to be the Jewish state, and the yellow parts were going to be the Arab state. And there was, in the middle of it, going to be Jerusalem, which was going to be something of a free city. It would not be controlled by Arabs or Israelis. It would be controlled by the United Nations and kept open to everybody. Now, looking at that map, I'm going to guess you can already see why nobody is going to be happy with this. I mean, the Jewish state is cut up into three pieces. You have these, separated by little teeny tiny divisions. And before the United Nations really has a chance to implement its plans, the UK is out. It's after World War II. They're broke. Right? They've spent everything they had fighting World War II. They're having a hard time feeding their own people and rebuilding their own country, much less trying to keep the lid on a conflict between Arabs and Jews in the Holy Land. And as the UK is leaving, Israel declares itself to be a sovereign Jewish state in 1948. Well, that doesn't work either. The Arabs are not just going to accept that now Israel will have everything under control of a Jewish state. And so they fight a war. Arabs versus Israelis for control, even as the British are trying to get out. And the Brits are essentially getting out as quick as they can. And we call this conflict the Arab-Israeli War of 1948. Again, this is because both of them want to control the territory. Both of them claim that what was Mandate Palestine should belong to them, either the Arabs or the Israelis. Neither side is interested in sharing it, or at least not sharing control of it. Now, to skip the details that many of you would find exciting, and I'm sorry, but that's sometimes how we have to do things here, Israel wins in 1948. Now, this kind of shows you what's happening. This is what things look like in 1946. The bright green areas are Palestinian-controlled areas, and the tan areas are controlled by Jewish groups. This was the plan in 1947 that we saw in the previous map. This is what things look like after 1948, where the Palestinian area, which is, again, the bright green, is vastly reduced, and the area under Jewish control is, of course, greatly expanded. Now, this is not simply just a matter of redrawing the areas controlled by which groups. It's also redrawing who lives where. There's not much Palestinian land left, and there's not enough for all of the Palestinians who were in Mandate Palestine. So 500,000 of them, more than 500,000, have to leave. Lots of them go across the border into Jordan. And lots of the families descended from those refugees are still over there, right, and still outside of Israel, wanting to return. Also, if you notice, Jerusalem is in the Jewish state zone. So they capture and they hold Jerusalem. That's going to be a problem. Kind of to help us understand why, just got another brief Ed puzzle question for you guys to check into. To which groups is Jerusalem holy? I'll give you guys some more time. Let's take another 20 seconds to get your answers in. I know this one makes you type.
Pardon the interruption, teachers and students. Would the NHS students please go to the auditorium for a yearbook picture? Would the NHS students please go to the auditorium for their NHS picture, please? Pardon the interruption, teachers and students. Would the NHS students please go to the auditorium for their yearbook picture? NHS students, please go to the auditorium for your yearbook picture.
All right, so we had lots of pieces of right answers. Lots of you identified at least two groups, and one, and my apologies if there was more than one, but there was only one I saw at the time I last scrolled through them. It is a holy site for Christians, Muslims, and Jews. Obviously, for this story, the key distinction is that it is holy to Muslims and Jews. Another question I want us to think about is this: which previous wars we have studied were fought over Jerusalem? And I'm going to give you a bit of a hint for this. They were several wars, but they all have one name. There's one name that covers all of them. It's not meant to be a riddle. I hope it is a helpful hint. Take 30 more seconds. All right, and several of you had the correct answer. It's the Crusades. Which is why it's also relevant to note that this area is holy also to Christians. There are going to be a series of further wars between the Jewish state of Israel and its Arab neighbors. In 1967, there's the 6 Days War, and in that war, Israel takes a lot of territory. It gets control of the rest of the modern borders of Israel, including the Golan Heights, and the West Bank. And I know if you're looking at it, he just called that the West Bank, but that's on the east side of the country. It is, but it's still the West Bank because it's the West Bank of the Jordan River that runs along the border. And Israel takes control of Gaza, that little strip of land that right now is so much in the news because of fighting between the Israeli Defense Forces and Hamas in Gaza, with all of those thousands upon thousands of Palestinian civilians caught in the middle. They also took over this huge chunk of land called the Sinai Peninsula, which belonged to Egypt. They've given most of the land back. And by most of it, I mean they gave back the Sinai Peninsula. They're not giving back the Golan Heights. If I was a betting man, I would bet that they never give that back, because that is strategically important if Syria tries to attack them again. And Syria has done this a bit. Among the things they have not given back is Jerusalem. And Jerusalem remains a major, if not the most important obstacle to peace between the Palestinians and the Israelis. In terms of our reasons, we need to think about our old friends, the motivations. And here, focusing on public religious motives to begin with. One is Jerusalem, especially in the old part of the city. I mean, the ancient part of the city that's still in walls because it was an old fortress city. We have holy sites for Christians, the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, for example, David being kind of a shared important figure in both Judaism and Christianity. We have Muslim holy sites, Haram al-Sharif, the Al-Aqsa Mosque. Right there against that zone of Muslim holy sites, we have the Wailing Wall, which is very important to Jews. And of course, so is David's Citadel. And again, as I said, that's kind of a shared important place for Christians and Jews. There's also a political part of this. I mean, and they're linked. But because Jerusalem is so important, both Israelis and Arabs want Jerusalem to be their capital of their own independent states, their own independent countries. And that's very hard to do. Because if one is going to control it and the other one is not, there's going to be a fight. If they have to share it, that's going to be difficult. And the U.S., for a long time, tried to say eventually it should be somehow shared. In 2017, however, there was a big shift in U.S. policy. President Trump, and remember, I'm talking about 2017. I don't want anybody to think that I'm buying into the January 6th conspiracy theory that he is still the president of the United States, but he was in 2017. In 2017, he, all by himself, recognized that Jerusalem belonged to Israel as the sovereign capital of Israel. Presidents can do that. Presidents have the power to recognize foreign countries, and if a president does that, then we officially recognize that place as its own independent country. The video here shows the reaction. And as you watch this, I just kind of want you to share your opinion. Can Arabs and Israelis share Jerusalem? And here you just need to choose an option. I just kind of want to know what you think. Oops, let me get the audio right. And what you're seeing there, that was the Wailing Wall. All right. Okay, so not all of you got your responses in, but most of you who have are not optimistic about the chances. All right, you guys do have an exit slip. This is not it, but I would also like you to, if you have a few seconds, answer that question. Which of the most recent conflicts we've looked at, Arab-Israeli or the conflict in Ireland, is more motivated by religion? All right, once you've done that, head on over to the February 20 exit slip. Same questions as the do now. You'll have 4 minutes to take it. It doesn't lock until 11, so you have time to answer this question and do the exit slip. And I will also be coming around to pick up your Complicity of the United States packets. All right, and that exit slip has gone live. Pack up nicely done today.